when I thought about this talk, I wondered what high school juniors and seniors were thinking about, so I asked a bunch of you. And it turns out that you're thinking about the future. And that's a good thing, because I heard a statistic the other day that says 80% of the jobs you're going to have over the next 20 years haven't been invented yet. So it's not like you're going to be able to train for this stuff. So I got to thinking about that, and I said, but you know what? There are probably some dispositions and some habits of mind that are important in how we deal with a future that's not entirely certain by a long shot. So one of the interesting ways to see the future, I've discovered, is to look at the past. So what I'd like to do this morning is take us on a little bit of a tour of rural Maine communities, because what I discovered is that Maine people are innovators, we're self-reliant, we're tinkerers, we're inventive, we behave globally, we're builders, and we're versatile. And keep in mind some of these ideas, because I'm going to come back to them in the end. But since we're in school, let's start with a quiz. Anybody here ever used a cell phone? Raise your hands, please. Yeah, a lot of people have used a cell phone. Okay, second question. Anybody here ever taken a picture with a cell phone? Raise your hands, please. Yeah, pretty common thing. Here's a tougher question. Ever taken a picture with a film camera? Raise your hands, please. A lot of hands, but not quite everybody. Another interesting statistic, 10% of the photographs that have ever been taken in human history were taken last year. Why is that? It's because taking pictures there's such a low barrier to taking a picture, because we've all got phones and they've got cameras in them. Didn't always used to be that way. It used to be glass plates, and you put this wet emulsion on them. You had to wear this black hood over your head out in the field and then put them in your camera. It's really, really fussy and really, really hard to do. Anybody here ski at Sugarloaf? So, yep, a few people. So that's right next to Kingfield, Maine. Couple of brothers, identical twin brothers, F.E. and F.O. Stanley, grew up in Kingfield, Maine, and one of the first things that they invented was a dry plate film process. So you didn't have to do all that messy stuff out in the field, and they sold that invention to a guy named George Eastman, who had started a company called Eastman Kodak. That was a really big household name. Everybody knew that name a few years ago. And just a couple of years, just recently, they stopped making film because of this whole digital revolution. So here's one lesson about people who are innovative and invent things. If they invent one thing, they're probably going to invent more than one thing. And that was really true with the Stanley brothers. I mean, these guys made violins. They designed houses. But the thing that they're best known for is they invented a vehicle called the Stanley Steamer. And here's an example. Here's F.O. and his wife, Flora, and they're heading up Mount Washington in their Stanley Steamer. This was actually the first motorized vehicle to ascend Mount Washington, thus qualifying them for this bumper sticker. Now, I don't have a photograph of the back of the car, so I'm not sure they ever got one of those, but by golly, they did deserve it. And one of the things they're really well known for is way back in 1906, which is pretty early in the history of the automobile, they set a land speed record at Ormond Beach, Florida. They got this car called the Rocket, Stanley Rocket, to go 127 miles an hour. Most of us will never go that fast in a car. So how long would you think it would take to break that record? Remember, they set it in 1906? It took 104 years. A British group in 2010 beat the record, but only by 11 miles an hour. So pretty amazing what these guys did in 1906. Here's another Maine character. He comes from a town in central Maine called Sangerville, and it's right next to Dover Foxcroft. And what this guy did, Sir Hiram Maxim, he invented the machine gun. And this is one of my favorite pictures out of Maine history. Here's the proud family. Here's Sir Hiram and his wife, and there's the proud mom and dad collected around the machine gun. It was such an important invention that he was knighted by Queen Victoria in 1901. And this was not his only invention. His first patent was awarded when he was 26 years old, and it was for an electric hair curling iron, rapidly followed up by a headlamp for a railroad locomotive. So again, these guys, usually if you invent one thing, you might invent something else. Now here in Maine, we're next to the ocean, so we build ships. Anybody here been to a town in Maine called Searsport? Kind of a small town on the coast of Maine. However, in 1870, 10% of all U.S. sea captains came from Searsport, Maine. That's amazing. Searsport was a household word in every major port in the world. And we traded, and when I mentioned that Mainers are global, it was in this period in the late 1800s where we led commerce with the world. We built the ships, we crewed the ships, and we traded the things that went back and forth from one country to another. And that shipbuilding tradition grew and flourished. We all know about Bath Iron Works in Bath. Here's an amazing statistic. During World War II, we really needed ships, and we needed them quickly. And Bath Iron Works built a new ship, a new destroyer, every 17 days. Now just think about that for a minute. Suppose you're assigned a research paper and you've only got 17 days to do it. You're going to have to work pretty hard to get that done and have it be any good. Imagine building a ship in that time. And the other interesting thing is that Bath Iron Works and a lot of companies in Maine have always been really flexible. So for instance, when there weren't a lot of destroyers to be built in the late 60s, they said, let's see if we can build some cargo ships, and sure enough they could. And even today, as warfare around the world and global threats change, Bath Iron Works is designing and building ships that are completely different from what they've ever built before. And Bath Iron Works isn't the only company in Maine that builds big things on the ocean. Chinbro, a company located in Pittsfield, Maine, built these oil rigs to explore for oil off Brazil. Look at these things, 12,000 tons. Really, really complicated, sophisticated structures built here. Why do I keep talking about big things out in the ocean? Well, it's because of this map. NASA reported just a couple, probably 6 years ago now, that the Gulf of Maine, right here, 26 miles offshore from Portland, is one of the 10 windiest places in the world and a fabulous place to build wind turbines. So along comes Angus King, who had been governor at Bowdoin College. In 2004, he gives a talk called Maine, the Saudi Arabia of Wind. And people laughed, but it was actually a really inspiring talk about how if we built 1,000 windmills in the Gulf of Maine, it would provide all of our energy, and that means electricity and heat and energy for transportation. A huge vision, and there's a Norwegian company who has built the first windmill to be floating in deep water. That's one of the tricks. It's easier to build them on shore. It's really hard to put them in 350 feet of water. And now they're trying to permit a couple of windmills here in Maine, which would be awesome because you would need structural engineers, civil engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, aerodynamicists, ecologists, biologists, 3D computer modelers, ship operators, mechanics, cooks, finance people, legal people. Almost all the skills you could imagine would be deployed in this $15 billion enterprise. And the University of Maine, right here in Orono, has done a really nice job of pulling together this consortium called the Deep Sea Wind Consortium. So it's a bunch of Maine institutions and companies who are interested in this, a bunch of national companies, and even a bunch of international companies. So if you really want to figure out how this ocean wind thing is going to play out, University of Maine is doing a really nice job with it. So, been talking about the ocean a lot. Cape Elizabeth is on the ocean. Anybody recognize this picture? Yeah, it's called a cookie jar. But we don't go there for the cookies, do we? I mean, why do we really go to the cookie jar? Because they make donuts. Anybody know where the donut was invented? Well, I don't know exactly where it was invented because it was invented on a ship at sea, but I know who it was invented by. A guy named Hanson Gregory from Rockport, Maine. Now think about this for problem solving. Here you are out at sea, and they would take these balls of dough, and they'd throw them in hot oil, and so they'd cook up, and you'd take the first couple of bites, tasted really good, tasted like a donut, and then you get to the middle, and it's like, man, the dough is raw and uncooked and really disgusting. So what does Hanson Gregory do? He says, if we cut a hole in the middle, that would equalize the surface area, so this donut would cook thoroughly. So there we have the donut. Speaking of food, there's another little town in Maine called Madison, Maine. And did you know, you go up on this hill and you're arriving in Madison and you look down, there are these massive greenhouses and they're glowing red because they're growing tomatoes in central Maine. Who ever would have thought that you could do that? And it's an interesting example of innovation. They didn't really change up too much about how you grow tomatoes, but this very innovative company called Backyard Farms discovered that it's actually cheaper to heat these greenhouses in the winter than it is to cool them in summer. So we have a tomato industry here in Maine. Now, since we're at school, I want to spend the last couple of minutes talking about education. 70% of kids between the ages of 2 and 5 know how to use a computer mouse, but only 11% can tie their shoes. And just think about that. And the computer mouse is one thing, but think about an iPad. Think how quickly those habits of mind changed. And as a matter of fact, that's another good example about what's useful about coming from a small state. We were the first, and we remain the only state, where every one of you guys, as 7th and 8th graders, were given a laptop computer. It's a great idea. Nobody else has figured out how to duplicate it. This photograph shows kindergartners in Auburn who all have iPads, just like you guys do. And why does that matter? Well, it turns out that 3 out of 4 students prefer tablets over textbooks, which is kind of the old way of doing it, and 90% of students think that tablets help them study more efficiently. Now, I don't know if they do or not, but it's really about what we think. Do your parents ever get on you about Facebook and tweeting and social media and stuff like that, and why don't you do your homework? Here's some interesting data. Kind of amusing to note that in 2009, nobody was sending tweets because there was no such thing as Twitter, and look now, 84% of students are using Twitter. And most important to tell your parents when they get on you, students who use Twitter average a higher GPA by an average of 0.5 points. So I hope that's useful to you as you do social media. And then I also found, what's interesting to me is how quickly things change. People who are your age read fewer what we call real books, but they read a lot of books on a tablet. And again, that has changed at lightning speed. And then one other, the Pew Research Group released their annual reading survey, and check this out. What is the age group that is most likely to have read a book in the last year? It's 18 to 24-year-olds, and the second group is 16 and 17-year-olds. So give yourselves a pat on the back for being readers. Anybody recognize this place? It's Gulf of Maine Research Institute. Were you in the 5th or 6th grade? If you grew up in Cape Elizabeth, you probably came here. And we bring 75% of Maine's 5th and 6th graders here to have a half-day science experience. Why do we do this? Here's why. Imagine that it's 5 or 6 years from now, from today. You're out of school, you're looking for a job, you found a place where you really want to work, and you've made it to the finalist pool. Just imagine if the hiring committee sitting around the table, instead of saying, I think we should hire her because she has a degree in computer science, just imagine if they said, I think we should hire her because she's from Maine. That's my aspiration for each of you and for every young person growing up in Maine. Thank you.